Hi, everybody. Good evening and welcome to EduTALK. We are continuing from last week with Mr. Philip Panaritis, and we're talking about the Black experience, reconstructing Black history. And one of the things that we mentioned last week too, and grappling with, is the idea of Black history as American history and Caribbean history and European history and world history. And so the Black experience is so interwoven with the white experience to some degree, and they have this interconnectedness. So we're going to look at, if we're reconstructing Black history, then we have to consider the other side as well, because a lot of our people, and our people meaning the citizens of the world, regardless of your color, we are all connected. And so if you take out one side of it, you're actually treating it with prejudice. So we want to look at Black history as a history, a unique history in itself, to look at the systems of oppression for people in general. And because Black people caught, what do you say, in the crossfire of power, then they get marginalized and discriminated and get treated with racism. So let's open up Dr. Barker and Mr. Panaritis with the idea of systems of oppression. You know, with
All right, let me go first because I think maybe I'm going to take it left field right away.
Okay.
Good evening, everyone. Last time we met, and for the first time I met Mr. Panaritis for the first time, Philip. It was a great conversation, but we were kind of strapped for time, to be fair, and so we tried to contain a monster in a space that it maybe shouldn't be. In terms of the conversation. So I'm glad that we do have a little bit more time to delve and to hear the ideas and ventilate the ideas, and then being able to also poke into those ideas and test the strength of those ideas. So I am going to be a bit controversial. I know, Dr. Dice, you might have a particular conversation that you want to have, but we're going to end up having it, but we might not start in the same place.
No problem.
So the other day, and this is really something that happened. So I'm going to start with the story about what happened, and then I'm going to bring Philip in to help us to unravel this. Philip brings a unique perspective. Funny enough, we do bring unique perspective to this simply because the African American experience is not the only experience. And so the way the race debate and the race issues are certainly packaged and presented is as if the African American experience is the experience, and every other experience is seen as a somewhat of a just an incidental experience. But the African American experience defines Black experience, and it isn't, and it isn't. And my lack of anger sometimes when I see some people, you know, unnerves them because they expect me to be angry and I'm not, you know. But here's the thing. Recently I was talking to a friend who is an African American as well. And we were just having a conversation. And normally, I mean, we never get into race issues simply because we met in a professional space. But this day in particular, something came up. And we had a moment where we're just talking. And normally we just exchange pleasantries. So I use what is maybe gonna say the PC term to describe let's say Black people or any other people, any minority, ethnic minority, pardon me using the terms loosely, as people of color. And he admonished me for using the term people of color. And he said to me, what do you mean when you say that? You know, he said he doesn't accept that term as a way of referencing to him simply because everybody has a color. So if we are going to have a discussion about people, but only certain people are considered to be people of color, he has a problem with that fundamentally. And since then, I've been reflecting on that to the point every time I use a term, because it's a shared term, right? Shared agreement exists. So you still use it to connect, right? I've been reflecting on whether I am accepting the institutionalized terminologies that continue to segregate. So am I overthinking this when I am beginning to find some form of solidarity with my friend's view of people of color as a representative term for people who once used to be ethnic minority and once used to be this and once used to be that? I'm throwing that out for everyone to talk about, but that is a real experience I've had and a learning journey that I'm currently on.
Yeah, it's interesting. They, and as I'm sure all three of us are aware of the evolution of terms from beginning even before the 50s and 60s from Negro to people of color was actually before Afro-American and African-American and before Black. It's funny that did a sort of an in-depth study to make a lesson for kids on the famous 1963 August March on Washington, where everyone remembers Martin Luther King's speech, but they won't believe me when I show them and tell them that, or I didn't believe it when I learned that he was just one of 10 speakers that day, and he wasn't even the guy that organized it. It was Bayard Rustin, who was working for the A. Philip Randolph, and so and the people who were there, interestingly, say that the guy that got the biggest response was oh, help me out, the fellow that just passed away, John Lewis.
John Lewis,
John
yeah.
Lewis was in a different generation than Martin Luther King,
Mhm.
and he wasn't one of the older sort of patriarchal Christian ministers from the South. He'd grown up in the North and in the Middle States. But anyway, one of the things that was notable about that at the time, and so we've sort of lost track of, is that he was the only person in his speech that didn't use the word Negro, that used the word Black, and talked about, and that was considered revolutionary. And
wow.
and there was a whole debate about whether he ought to have done that. So yeah, all of these terms are malleable and I think sort of imperfect. And ultimately, you know what? I don't think that knowing the correct and first of all, knowing that correctness in terms is going to depend on whether it's 20 years ago or 20 years forward, and that these things will evolve. I don't think that that's enough. In other words, does that mean that in my heart and in my head, because I used the wrong term, does that mean that I am not well educated about it, that I don't have compassion for the persecution of the African diaspora for hundreds of years? It shouldn't. And because if it was that easy to change your heart, if it was that easy to educate your mind, then we wouldn't spend years and years in agony doing it. We would just learn the correct term. Someone would say, oh, these are the terms we're using today. I would memorize them, which anybody could do, and we would all be happy and brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
That's very true. And to add to that, the good reflection, the ideas that I had when I came to America, to add some personal perspective to it, is in Florida when I first came here, I had to remind people that I'm not African American. You know, I'm a Caribbean people. Mind you, I really this taking me, it's a good segue into what we're discussing, because I didn't know of so much colorism, the different types and the shades until I came to America. And then I'll be identified and actually put on paper that I'm a certain color, because I've never dealt with that.
Yeah, we never had that in Jamaica at
We
all.
don't have that in Jamaica. And even though we have a little bit of racism,
There are some colorisms that
a
exist,
lot of classism. Right.
but not in the kind of
Yeah.
systemic.
It is systemic, where you actually have to document your color all the time. You really have to document it.
Identify as something, right?
Yeah. So it's strange. It's very strange. And I grew into understanding that I don't understand the whole thing as a person, but I understand technically and politically why it is being done. And I have to keep it like that.
I'm thinking about what you're talking about now, and I think there is a space just in the delineation that we're bringing to this. Another story, I had a Canadian friend, Canadian colleague that became a friend. And I hope the story doesn't create the idea that maybe he wasn't as well informed about the world. But just to piggyback on the story that you just shared, in the sense that you had to assert to people that you are not African American, and for some people, there's no other Blackness. And I remember talking to him one day, and he said to me that he uses the term African American as a reference to all Black people, because he just doesn't have any other conception of people being Black. He just doesn't have it. The only conception he has had, and everything he's learned in his education system, is about African Americans. There's no other conception. Now, I've had people, when I share this story, that say, but he must have Black people in Canada. But it all depends on where you grew up and how you have been sheltered and how you still see people and still haven't responded to what you're seeing every day, but still following the themes, the thematics that you have been, a schema that you use to understand the world, right? But just as you were talking, I'm just wondering if there's a space for a new blockbuster best-selling book called 50 Shades of Black.
Definitely. Yeah.
Just to bring some clarity that there are many, 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 many shades of Black. And it comes back to the bigger ideas of culturally responsive. You can have a group of Black kids, and even though everyone is in that room and they're Black, or a Black lead team that you're leading, your cultural responsiveness still has to have a high level of dynamism to respond to what each of those people might be and consider themselves to be. 50 Shades of Black. I just thought about it just now.
What about, instead of 50 Shades of Black, because somebody owned the shades already, what about spectrum of Blackness?
No, I want to take Black and turn it into a different.
Yeah.
So Philip, talk to us, because you're well versed in this and you have done a lot of work in it. The idea of like the Blackness, where does it come from? This idea,
you know what? A lot of it comes from the capitalist model of slavery, and the idea that of chattel slavery, that your children are born slaves if you're a slave, which, as you know, as we know, wasn't the only model of slavery. In other parts, in other times and places in the world, it was a temporary thing, or your children could be born free, or you could pay it off, or there was a limit on it. But and then what's added to it is the veneer of pseudoscience. So, because I think that science helps, just like religion helped, because you ask yourself, how did these professed Christians in America and later just in the southern states with chattel slavery. How could they go to church every Sunday? And were they that insincere? Was the minister that insincere? And I don't think that's it. It's difficult to put ourselves in that place because everything around them, including academia, if they went to college, if they were wealthy in the South, including the ministers in the Protestant, mostly Protestant churches, would find examples in the Bible of slavery. And well, it must be God talks about it. The New Testament talks about slaves. So it wasn't just that, and that's one of the things that in teaching this to adolescents, and when you talk about the indignities and the awful things that enslaved people went through, and you ask kids, how they would have reacted. Oh, no, I wouldn't put up with that at all. And, I would, first of all, so they don't really understand how it's not just a mean guy or couple guys, it's a whole society that's, even when Black people are numerically superior, when they're in as they were in Mississippi and South Carolina, everything about your culture, if you're a well-to-do white person, affirms that. That's what the Bible tells us. It's okay. Everybody did it. And science helps us divide people into, because they have a basic problem. What do we do now? We bring these folks from Africa and we want them to mate. Notice the term normally associated with animals, not people.
Yeah.
We want them to produce offspring because that's free money. I know the more little babies and boys and girls that I have with these folks, the more I am able to sell them. And by the time that slavery is almost over, the principal wealth that lies in these plantations down south is not the land or the crops or the tools or anything else or the buildings or the machines. It's unequivocally the people, the backs that bend over and do that work. So
and that was established clearly in the movie Amistad, the premise of the movie Amistad.
Absolutely.
That this was really where somewhere along the line capitalism had crossed the Rubicon, so to speak, from about business and making money, but gotten into a kind of immoral way of looking at people. But allowed people to see it as property, see people as property,
right,
and function exclusively as if it was just an asset, a number on a balance sheet, and didn't have any moral response because capitalism had taught them and the systems were designed in such a way that it was easy for people to look at each other and say, oh, you have this number and this number. And the creativity was, no, how can you perpetuate the system?
And science and commerce and religion all found, and government all found the most convenient answer, the answer that didn't break your heart, that you could live with, whether it was, oh, these people have always been slaves, or that later on we find science, and science is very helpful in this making this argument because they, again, pseudoscience, they find gradations between people. So what happens when you have mixed race people? Well, we start counting into these bizarre, down to 1/64th of a person, and each one of them has a name. A person who's 1/8 Black is an octoroon, and you tell the kids this and let them read about it, and it's stunning, and it's so bizarre. It seemed to me, and I think it seemed to many of the kids. But so what happens if the kid is, the fella on I can't think of it, Dwayne, the famous case with separate, but where you couldn't ride on the train down in Louisiana.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway,
What it's
that
called.
man, and everybody, our audience knows who he is. 1894, in the cases against the Attorney General of Louisiana, because he was trying to pass so he could say, and he did pass until someone informed on him and
Oh,
said,
wow.
in his background, and it turns out that he was, that's why I said octoroon, he was
Which
1/8
is,
black, and he had lived his whole life as a white man, he had made money as a salesman and servicing black stores, and so he was able to, he said he wanted the comfort and of the white carriages,
Yeah.
and so that's what he did.
Wow.
And
wow.
so all of this time, you find science that is coming in and telling people that there's some hard and fast objective, not subjective,
Yeah.
objective reasons for this.
Yeah.
And before that, Zora Neale Hurston used to work. Her job in Harlem was to measure craniums.
The craniums, yes, yes.
Yeah, and there was a whole, again, now a pseudoscience, which helped lead to eugenics,
Yep.
which was practiced here by the castration of
Yep.
involuntary castration of black male convicts or people in the penal system, and then taken to its final horror borrowed by
But castration still work in its own way, right, Philip? I
What's
mean,
that?
it's funny how
Castration.
even the eugenics can, with enough, with the creativity that people have, that the very outcomes that would have existed during slavery time can still be achieved in modern times. So you can castrate an entire generation of black men by simply putting them in prison.
Yep.
You don't have to do the same process. The outcome is the same.
That's right.
It is interesting, you can take them out of society and create a second-hand industry where they function and earn, let's say, slave labor, which is just enough to cover their accommodation. But they are the bottom feeders by simply using the penal system as a way to begin the process. Yeah. And you come out, you cannot get a job. So you have to find a job that pretty much only a slave would do. So it is interesting how the methods can change, but the outcomes can still be the same.
That's right. That's right. And, in that effect, that was along with sharecropping, that was one of the ways that in the American South, after they supposedly lost the Civil War, within 10 years, they were back to the same exploitative relationship with enslaved African Americans by sharecropping, which meant that the owner figures out how much you're going to pay. Sometimes you get paid in script. You have to buy things from the company store. At the end of the year, you actually owe money instead of getting paid. And then the other one is the convict leasing thing, where
that is modern.
Enormous penitentiaries are built in Angola, Louisiana, and Parchman, Mississippi, and with tens of thousands of men who are then leased out for a nominal amount. They're paid nothing, but the state pays to house them and feed them, and then they go work for free
But for proper work, they are working
and they don't make babies either. when they're in there, as
So
you said.
they're not a risk in any way at all. It's the easiest
Right.
way to.
Mhm.
It's just interesting how the outcomes,
Yeah.
and how the outcomes of are similar.
Right.
The
The other thing
outcomes
about
are similar. Yeah.
the other thing about the kids too is that a kid would say, and I think a lot of white children would say as well, kids of any race, that when they heard about the horrors of slavery, they would and ask and tried to had to write an essay about you're back there at that time. How would you react? And oh no, that's not right. I would stand up for that, and I would organize civil disobedience, and we would get guns, and we would um, again back to the idea that it the history bad history tends to demonize a few crazy people, like World War II and Nazism.
Mm-hmm.
Even though millions of Germans voted for it,
Mm-hmm.
even though we have pictures of rallies of women in Vienna, Austria, when the Fuhrer
Very
comes
much.
in, they're
Very much. Yeah.
crying, they're ecstatic.
The youth organizations,
It,
everything.
it's all the fault of a few people, Goebbels and Goering and Hitler, who led them astray. And I think that we do that with slavery too. We tend to have, it's Jefferson Davis,
Yeah,
but
we have a few figures that are highlighted, but what it does is in my view, it almost absolves society from the blame.
and the biggest way it absolves it is to say that it's not the worst war in American history wasn't about slavery at all. In many states, they taught us that it was about states' rights.
State rights. It's
There
state
was a
rights.
narrow argument between the rights of the federal government versus the rights of the state.
Mm-hmm.
The
Yep.
fact that it all came down to the conflict was entirely about slavery, and
But it was still characterized as, and the funny thing is, even as I say, it's funny, but it isn't. But when you follow American politics deeply, the connotations, people still speak about state rights on numerous issues. Abortion is about state rights, but everyone understands the beginning, the genesis. They understand what this means, and the other underlying
right.
things that comes from that. But state rights is a massive, massive
Yeah.
loaded term.
Mm-hmm.
Law and order is another one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then movies, starting with the popular imagination in a whole series of books, and Gone with the Wind was first a popular book before it was a popular movie. But even before that, with the movie that was played in the White House about by Woodrow Wilson, who was a Southerner, the Birth of a Nation,
Birth of a Nation. Yeah. Yeah.
which was about the Ku Klux Klan. And
Yeah.
it showed the Ku Klux Klan was rescuing white women
Mm-hmm.
again, and their sex is always involved in this too. It's a subtopic that some teachers don't feel comfortable bringing up or talking about with adolescents, but it's been part of the story from the beginning. And so when you see it pictorially in a movie, it's out in the open. It's pretty young, small, helpless white women being uh, predator. And notice how that term is often comes up. Another animal reference for often for black males. And so that's what they call those poor guys in Central Park that were found innocent. And Donald Trump led that, by the way.
Yes.
Predators. Anyway, so you see that why do these people belong in prison, and did they belong in chains all those years? Well, they're after our women, and we must defend our women by keeping them in bondage. So, and that's what the Ku Klux Klan and other groups like that they saw as their rationale.
I think we're losing
Yeah, we're losing you, Philip. Your audio is going like the last time. What? Yeah, we can. You brought up some good points here between Barca and yourself, Philip. The idea of blackness and where it came from, and the sustaining that level of oppression of one set of people. We can we take it a step further by reasoning with the idea of with the incarceration and whatever other systemic changes or oppressive state that they keep in reality for some people. What are other ways in which you can still see the continuation of the oppression of a people? For example, in sports, and when we were talking earlier on, we talk about the demographics of people on the court in basketball teams or football teams, and then the spectators. So is it that there are certain systems that control? And when you look at the coaching staff, majority of the coaching staff, they're white. They had to have some serious changes with the National Basketball League in order for them to promote more Black managers and coaches in the league, even recently. So is it that we need more of those changes, or the changes is happen organically, or they're desperately trying to make sure that it doesn't look as if they're more Black people playing the sports, and they're actually this idea of trading people. You know, one player, I sold this player to the other team. And to me, this idea of plantation probably hasn't stopped. It probably changed.
it doesn't stop.
It
It doesn't stop.
yeah.
Michelle Alexander, I don't know if you're familiar with her writing. One of the most enlightening book I've ever read, because as I say, I'm not African American. A book called The New Jim Crow.
The carceral.
Yeah, the book is called The New Jim Crow.
Beautiful book.
Powerful book. And that book gave me the schema to understand American and the issues that are pervasive and quite likely will never go away from the American system. When I read that book, that's when I got the kind of moment when I said, no, I get it. No, I get it. And that book launched a war on the concept of colorblind legislation. Legislation that seems to be communicating that America is a country that doesn't have colors issues. But in that colorblindness, the subjective takes precedence. It's a powerful book. It does explain a lot about the penal system and all the other things that are happening in terms of the large scale, fully designed incarceration plan that is running exactly as how it should run.
And you see that in
Hold on, Philip.
Yeah.
We're losing your audio, so
Get closer.
no, not closer. Can you log off and then log back in, and then we'll let you in? Yeah, because I think the audio is giving trouble again. So log back in.
Speaking.
Yeah, and so Barca, we'll continue talking, and then he'll come back.
Yeah, man. As I said, that book you need to get that book.
What is it called?
The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. Powerful book.
Down at Penn, doesn't she?
Not hearing you clearly, Philip.
Just log off and come back.
Yeah, log off, and then your audio will be totally fine once you. Let me get you out, and then you'll come back. Come back in. Yeah. All right. Good.
No, that book, as a Jamaican reading a book like that, it explains a lot about the system and how even you see all these things what we see happening, what we saw the George Floyd and the number of shootings that we used to see during when we used to have time to watch videos during COVID, the number of those police shootings that people used to look at and go, how does it reach that situation? Right?
Yeah.
And I read that book long before that. I read that book maybe 3 or 4 years before before these issues were being publicized a lot, because obviously Facebook and all these things and camera phones and all these things weren't as popular some point in the past. But once I read that book, every one of those interactions were as clear as day. The police stopping men for tailgate, lights, tail lights. And then it turns into a confrontation that leads to the person being killed. And it doesn't matter how many times they go to court, you cannot win the case. Yeah?
Yeah.
All of that became absolutely crystal clear to me. I could watch it and see how it was going to end.
Yeah.
Because that book, she did a research into the penal system and pretty much pointed that pretty much the percentage of Black male that are currently incarcerated.
It's the same with The Sum of Us. There's a book that Heather McGee published in 2021.
Yeah.
And she brought out some good points with it's either the zero sum. It's really the zero sum mentality of Americans that white people in general.
Oh, wow. You understand? Zero sum game.
Yeah, zero sum. Yeah. It's either having all or everybody has nothing at all.
Yeah. Zero sum game. It's a resolution principle that is very much a one-sided view, a binary view of how the world works. Non-nuanced.
Yeah. Philip, yes, you're back on again.
Okay, good.
You're back as well. And you're back as well.
Yes. All right. So Barker, refresh us and then Philip will take it in.
No, I was just talking about the systems and how reading Michelle Alexander's book gave me an insight that I would not have had about American power structures and the hegemonies that exist and how it manifests with the kind of segregated system, even though it's not segregated in the Jim Crow era, but it still manifests as the same segregation.
De facto.
Yeah.
In fact, if not in law. Yeah.
So with that, some people talk about the idea of, and I really wasn't going this angle, but the idea of America not being built on racism. And when you read books like The Summer of 1776, Heather McGee book, which is The Sum of Us, and you can see the creation of the Constitution, the argument in the constitutional creation, and then the policies and the amendments that took place after that, and the policies that we're still going through, what is happening in Florida and so on. It begs the question, are we in a racist society? And to me, when I have gone through several different school systems in America, and I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, if some things were different, would I have been treated with prejudice, or other people who have grown up here and so on? And I've heard several stories from Florida to DC to New York about the ideas of prejudice and being treated with racism and so on. And I some things I apologize for, because when I first came here, I look on the idea of Black people in America, which is African American, the African American experience. And I say, coming from Jamaica, I say, why are you not like making use of the system here? Move, push through, work hard. Black people need to work hard and so on. And I realized, just like what you said earlier, Philip, that is not the person who is standing in front of you, but it's an actual system, and that person is just one like a gatekeeper in the system. And if you fought that person, you actually, behind that person is a system that is it's really pushing against you. So what do we do with it? And so I look back on my own thinking towards people, and I said, honestly, I really apologize. I in with my thoughts and what I have gone through, my
Yeah.
experience, my development, and then what these other people have gone through in another nation, that I would be very frustrated and angry. And when I look on the idea of being born in a nation that doesn't really care about me, it doesn't look at me and say I can become the president of this nation,
So
but
what
another
about
person
Barack
can be.
Obama's presidency then? Why
Huh?
doesn't that change your opinion?
No, the Barack Obama president is like a unicorn in among horses. It's like qualifying the idea that I have, how should I put it now? One, I let in, like certain school systems, I let in a number of people, so therefore I have diversity.
Yeah.
You know,
To be
but
fair, to
diversity
be
doesn't
fair, Barack's presidency, was not developed. And this is, Philip, you can maybe tell me when I'm saying something that doesn't,
Yeah,
but this is,
correct us,
No,
Philip.
all right. So correct me
no,
after I'm going to make the point that I'm going to say, yeah?
Mhm.
I might stick to the unicorn in some way when I say it, but Barack's presidency did not follow the procedure, Barack presidency and his rise to being the president did not follow the natural procedure that he's supposed to follow. He was a junior senator. That's the first thing when he decided to run for presidency. Barack largely fundraised outside of the mainstream fundraising systems. Otherwise, he would never have become president. In fact, the manner in which Barack Obama became president, I'm going to say this. I don't think I've ever seen it written anywhere, that Donald Trump literally used the same procedure to gain funding to become president.
Mhm.
Step out, use social media. Barack was a big tweeter long before
That's
tweeting
true.
was,
Yeah,
So in
absolutely.
a sense, what he showed was that you needed to create your own system in order to beat the system. You cannot use the system to beat the system.
hmm hmm
Alternatives.
Yeah,
Go
That's
on,
my
Philip. Philip, go on.
no, and I think that that people would point out that uh, critics would point out that he paid a price to do that, and maybe we're as a country paying a price, because I think that the first election, the election of Trump, which
as
of
a
course
response to that.
yeah, I think it was a response to that. I think it helped motivate um, the white supremacists in this country that never again, and to reclaim the honor that had been, in their words, that had been lost by having this black man who was not only black, but he was young, he was of mixed race, he was something called an organizer, which I'm sure many of them didn't know what that meant, or that meant probably a bomb thrower or something. But he admitted he smoked weed.
Yeah.
Um, he was of a different generation. He danced well for a president. He had a little rhythm. He played ball, played basketball. Anyway,
Basketball.
but to do that, to get to there, he was really very careful uh, about stressing his commitment to all Americans, and was loath to be seen as disposing favors or
Yeah.
unearned positions for African Americans. And if you remember, during the campaign, there was there still is. He's still in Chicago. He was Barack and Michelle were attending a church where the pastor was Jeremiah Wright.
Jeremiah Wright, yeah.
Jeremiah Wright is still there, and he had taken some very activist and unconventional positions. He had said things about the Nation of Islam leader that were and Reverend Farrakhan that were things that he approved of. He didn't say I approve of everything, but he said I like that they fight for this, and I think we can make common ground in that area. But the fact that he had anything anything good to say about it was, and there were other things that just rattled a lot of, and the mainstream media picked them up and they made him Jeremiah Wright, Reverend Wright became an
Achilles heel.
The Achilles heel. And the face of what could happen if Obama went too black. And so Barack was compelled to, in a larger sense, disavow him, which is something that is often used with black people that have to go and, someone will say, not even in their party, not even their family, will say something and, well, do you disavow it? Do you renounce it? Do you? And so he had to renounce being part of that church, and he had to identify things that Reverend Wright had said that he didn't agree with, and he really never stood up and said, my faith is a private thing, or things that he, like I said, that he did agree with. So I don't know if you want to say he threw him under the bus, but he made it clear he acceded to the white folks said, but you must disagree with this and that, and he said yes. So and at every step of the way. So there were he got to where he was, but there was a price to pay for him, and I think there was a price to pay. I think that the country paid the price, and I don't feel too strongly about that, because if we all voted like we ought to, that I'm sure that wouldn't have been the case. But I mean, not voted for Barack, but got out and voted in other elections, in every election. We're terrible at that. If you think and
fight for the right, but then too busy to use
if they
it.
wanted us, the people that make these laws and rules, if they really wanted that, you can look at countries over across the channel there in Europe, where there's amazing 80%, and it used to be in this country back when they only let rich landed white men vote. No, but they in Europe there's incentives for it. You get it's made easy. You can show your driver's license or your cédula or something like that and walk in and vote.
Yes.
And you can do it early. You can do it on the day of. Here it's so hard. And why is it so hard? Even though there's no evidence and hasn't been any evidence of widespread fraud at all.
Oh yeah, the new term is election integrity, right?
Election integrity, and it's designed to keep out poor people, and it's designed to keep out people of color.
So because we as you know, we're winding down the time. But let's talk about this for a second, because it's zero sum, and Black history actually is history in itself, and it incorporates other people's history, white history, Black history, European history, Asian history, and so on. All of it is history, and so we are affected. People are affected when policies are made. when laws are passed, it's not one set of people are disenfranchised from that. In a system, there are low-income people who are white who are being affected by these laws as well, and Black people, of course. So how in general, how are people being affected by the policies? For example, with schools in a certain neighborhood, in a certain city, like New York City, which is very segregated.
Well,
It's not
the
because
most
you're Black.
segregated city, yeah. The
Yeah,
most segregated neighborhoods and schools in the country, de facto, not by law, but by practice. And that's why I said, earlier in the other version, the earlier recording that we did, that um, if we don't talk about these things, if we don't talk about race and gender and class in social studies classes, then where? Because
yeah,
we don't live together usually. We usually go to different supermarkets and different churches and different parties and
Yep.
concerts and all of that. So,
Yep. Yep.
you
That's
know,
so true. That's so
yeah,
true.
so the school has a
and
massive role to play. The school
The
what's
has,
that?
school, the school is maybe the
The
school
school
can
mirrors,
have the
absolutely,
school can have,
absolutely.
but we
well,
have to. But we
One of
need
the
to
things
remember, and
that I
well,
wanted to say is that
sorry, sorry.
if we talked about carceral, about penitentiaries and jails, and one of the things that, again, there was a pseudoscientific overlay that came from the schools and religion on slavery in this country. There's also that today in a different way directed toward particularly Black male students. And
yes,
so you find a gross discrepancy in the numbers between kids who are diagnosed with disabilities and with individual education plans. That means
yeah,
special ed.
yes,
Why is that? Aside from with everything else being equal,
yeah,
the SES of the parents, in other words, the class is almost the same. The geography is the same, similar zip codes, similar all of those things, and yet compared to girl students, compared to white students, the Black students, the Black boys are 2 to 3 times more likely to be put in special education. And I think, I'm sorry, but I think that's because they scare
yeah,
people. They
yes,
scare teachers. They
yeah,
scare the public. And no one's willing to say that or talk about it. So, in order to make that happen, and I think some of this stuff even happens unconsciously, but it doesn't matter whether it's conscious or not, because the effect is, if the effect is that Black boys are twice as likely to to be in special education and receive degrees that are less than New York State Regents degrees, which is what happens, and also, to be honest, the level of education that happens in special ed can be very very loving, and but it's not the same.
no,
You don't
it's
have kids.
mediocre.
Yeah, it's not equal.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
okay,
you can have kind people, but in terms of, they don't have, for example, in high school and junior high, you need to have a history degree to
yeah,
teach
yeah,
in a graduate degree, or you need to be licensed in social studies. And
Yeah.
when the special ed teacher is licensed in special ed, which is a pedagogy, and it's an important one, and it's hard like anything to master. I'm not putting it down in any way, but your kid is being taught science, social studies, mathematics, and all by the same teacher. And I don't know. I mean, I certainly couldn't do that. I don't pretend to know hardly anything about science or math or any of that.
Mhm. True,
It's a
true.
different, well, anyway, what do you
It's
think
true.
of that?
It's true. It's very true. And we have gone through this because we live in the education system as pedagogues.
Yeah,
And we have seen it because I can't do justice to a reading lesson. I can't teach reading comprehension.
right,
I
right,
can teach math and I teach
right,
science.
right.
But for reading and language arts, I wouldn't do justice for that. And history, social studies in general, I wouldn't do justice to that unless I prepped for a week before I can do 1 day lesson.
Mm-hmm,
Yeah,
mm-hmm.
so I get what you're saying. It's very true. It's very
Yeah,
true.
but the system is
I remember,
functioning. It's not a what you're seeing is not a bug in the system. I know you hear me say this before.
Like a
yeah,
broken.
yeah, yeah.
It's not a
No,
bug that is in the system. This is the program.
yep, it's
This
the
is the
program.
actual design of the program. And it is working exactly in the way that it is supposed to work because the outcomes are the same that were expected. Now, if the program is working in the way, the only way you can even begin to affect that, is to change the entire operating system.
Mm-hmm.
You have to change it if you want a different outcome. Because, you can tell the difference how an operating system can impact, by just try and shift from working, like if you spend every day you're working on a Windows machine
Mm-hmm.
and you go home and you start working on a MacBook, still a
Gonna change.
computer, still on the internet, still trying to do the same things, but you physically can tell that the operating system engages with you in a different way. How
Yeah,
you relate to it, it expects a different kind of interactive experience. Now, what we're finding when man figured out that they could create learning systems that can be trained in some ways to get the outcomes they want, and those could be manifested as social systems. It's a kind of mind frame to realize, okay, so what should the education system do in order for this to happen?
right.
So I come to the point when I say this, it's only because you said the education system is a place to effect the change.
Mhm.
But we have to dial it back a few steps before that, because in its current iteration, it doesn't even have the capacity to do that because it does not have that programming in its functioning. It is designed to do one outcome, and the only thing you can do is do it faster, harder, longer, or more, but you can't stop it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And also for whom, for whom is it being done? And in many cases that it, not always, but it's sometimes it it's designed to replicate the status quo.
Yeah.
So rather than to talk about what possibilities we have here as humans and how we can end war and hunger and all of those things, we talk about what jobs General Electric is going to need in the
Yes.
future and what, well, General Electric doesn't deter right now. That means they determine the world. And if
Yep.
they determine the world, then they happen to make most of their money off of selling engines to warplanes. So is that what we want the world to be? Or why doesn't education, so many educators have written eloquently, include, I think of John Dewey, comes to mind, have written eloquently about the possibilities of making education serve a world or to recreate. How can we help train people and listen to them and bring about a world that's more fair and more just and more loving, not just makes more money and not just uses more resources or is has growth on the wealth index every year, but a more peaceful world, and a world that more belongs to more of us than the one envisioned by Elon Musk and Bill Gates and the people at the top of the pyramid.
I guess, Marco, we can finish off right with there, because I was trying to figure out how do we leave people with hope, and Philip, you did that just well. To create a system that reflects people and not the few that is at the top. Also, to look at tackling this reconstruction of Black history, which involves every history, in the classroom, by talking about history in social studies. That's where we need to get the conversations, because everybody is going home to different places. So we need to tackle it there where everybody gather.
It's a
Thank you.
big job, sir. It's a big
Yeah.
job.
It's a big job. The fight still continues. Philip, I can't thank you enough for giving us your time, because time is very precious, and we really appreciate you. And Barca, love is love. Love is love.
Yeah, man. Thank
like
you very much for that.
I like the fact that Dr. Barker was a bigger part of this half of the recording, and because he has plenty to offer.
Yes, because he's busy over there in England. So
Well,
when we get him, we get him.
No, it's a good conversation. It can get deeper, but we have to sometimes.
Yeah.
Well, he says bold things and good.
Yes.
And it's a
We
good
need
conversation.
people to do that, especially people in power that help shape children's lives, like principals.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's true. Very, very true.
Okay, guys.
Yeah.
My friend.
Philip, we're gonna touch base for Women's History Month. So
okay,
just take a breather, and then we'll touch.
all right.
Yes,
Bye-bye.
take care.
Take care.
Say
Bye-bye.
hello to Judy.
Bye, everybody. Thank you. This has been EduTALK, and we will see you next week. I hope you enjoyed this session. Take care. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.